Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. This image was taken in the Queens Lake area of New South Wales at a place called Bonny Hills. We found this location in the middle of the day and decided to return at sunset to take advantage of the softer and more forgiving light. I was shooting raw, of course. One of the first things we notice about this image is its coldness. It's seriously affecting the appeal, isn't it? The sun has already set, and this shift to blue is not uncommon. So we definitely have a problem here with colour balance. And if the image colour has shifted towards blue, then every other colour has also been negatively affected. Now, I think a lot of amateur photographers sometimes miss the importance of colour balance. If we look critically at the image, we can even see how the sunset colours are muted and dull. There's also a fair degree of haze here too, and in some cases that can add wanted atmosphere in our images, but here it's probably something I might want to address because it doesn't seem to be quite strong enough to add much. Now, image editing is a series of steps. Each step may not be significant on its own, but when we look at them all added together in the final image, as we are here, they often add up to a massive leap. Now, because I can show my finished image right at the start of this video, I already know that I've used about 13 different steps. But none of them were very large, certainly none of them were difficult, but they do add up. Now I'm going to move through this video just a little quicker than usual, but remember, you can rewind and play again any part of the video, and you can download the video from my website too, if that's more convenient. The important thing here is not the actual settings used with the tools I've chosen, because those settings are always going to vary from image to image and even with personal choice. It's the techniques that are most important and also the route we take towards our final image. So let's crack on, and it'll be global changes first, then strategic changes where necessary to take us from here to here. With the image open in Camera Raw, we can see that it's going to need colour balance adjustment and a fair amount of colour added. So the first thing we should take a look at is chromatic aberration. If we click and drag over the leaves on the right hand side, we can see clear evidence of that chromatic aberration. But to remove it, all we need to do is go to the optics and tick the box to remove it. Now we do have options to go down here to manual settings, but I've spent just a couple of minutes trying to get this even better, and I really cannot make an improvement on ticking that box. And that's a pretty good sign. So I'm happy to move on by right-clicking and fitting the image onto the screen. The next thing I'd like to do is to tick the box to use the profile corrections. We can see the tree line here has a little bit of a curve to it. Ticking that box will fix that, although we do have to straighten a slight lean to the left. So let's move on to the crop tool next, where we can both straighten that tree line in the middle distance and improve the composition by cropping. So up to the top right, select the crop. I'm going to move my cursor just outside the picture space, because as I click and drag to rotate the image, you can see that Camera Raw gives me a grid, so I can line up the tree line nicely. When I release, I can quickly check the gap at the right hand end and the gap at the left hand end, make sure that I think it's fairly straight, and I think that's as good as we're going to get. But I'm also going to drag up the bottom of my crop, I'm going to lose that little bit of black in the bottom left corner, which is a good thing. And it does put that bottom third horizon line nicely in position. Just looking at the image, have I got that absolutely as good as I can? Maybe a slight little rotate to the left. That looks better. Hit the enter key and I'll hit Control 0 to fit the image back on screen. Now we need to address that blue cast, and we can use the basic tab for that. When I open up the basic tab, I'm going to use the white balance tool here. Click the eyedropper and I'm looking for an area that should be fairly neutral. Now I've had a bit of a click around this image prior to recording, and I found the cloud in between those two trees looks about right, because when I click on it, the colour balance is corrected to a level which I think is much closer to what I saw on the night I took the shot. Now if we look up at the top right to the histogram is looking reasonably healthy. It certainly stretches to the left hand side, which controls the blacks and the shadows, and also the right hand side with the whites and the highlights. So all I think I'm going to do here is to drop the exposure just a little bit. You can see the peak on the left rise up, which is not a bad thing. But I'm going to go down and give this quite a healthy shot of clarity, and that helps quite a bit. And I think I'll also add quite a degree of colour. I'll step up the vibrance, and I may even give it a little bit of dehaze. Now what I'm watching for here, I want to improve the tones on the left hand side, but what I don't want is that warm coloured sunset sky to go the wrong colour. So I just want to give a little bit of dehaze just to improve matters but not go too far. But then when we look over to the right hand side, you can see I've upset the colours in those distant trees. I think we can put that right with the colour mixer. So if we go straight to the colour mixer, and I'm going to use this targeted adjustment tool here, selecting the hue first. If I click over that colour and I drag to the right, you can see the slider over on the right moving more towards the mauve colours. If I go too far, of course, it's bad. If I go left, it actually gets worse than when I started. So I just need to go a little bit to the right, probably no more than plus 20, plus 21, that's not too bad. Now if I select saturation and stay with that adjustment tool, I can just click and drag to the left and just drop down the colour until I get something which looks just about right within the overall picture space. Now the biggest weakness we have in the image now is the left hand half. I think we can fix that using a graduated filter. So I'm going to select that from the right hand side, go over to the extreme left and click and drag. I'm going to touch the V key just to lose that bounding box, and I'm going to drop down the exposure a little bit. I'll drop the highlights. I'll take a look at a bit more clarity there. But I think that's about as far as I want to go. I'm conscious that I've got a bit of a light haze along the tree line, and maybe I can deal with that with the burn tool in Photoshop a little bit later. But at the moment what I'd like to do is maybe apply even another graduated filter, but right up at the top left. So I'm going to touch the Z key just to come away from that for a moment. Just take a minute or two to look at the image and decide if that's what I want to do. And I think I would like to get it a bit darker. So let's select another one of those graduated filters. I'll touch the V key and you can see the pin from the original one. But I'm going to click right at the top there and drag down. And just drop that exposure a little more clarity perhaps. I'll try some blacks, highlights down. You can see the sort of thing I'm trying to do. Let's try rotating that and you can see it darkens that part there. I think I'm more or less happy with that. I'm going to touch the Z key and have a minute looking at the image to decide what I need to do next. Having a 1 or 2 minute timeout from the image. And sometimes if we can just walk away for a couple of minutes and come back, we often see things we don't see when we're in full creative flow. If you look at the right hand third, maybe a little over, it's a bit cool in comparison to the left side. So maybe I could use even a third gradient filter to do something there. So if I pick up the gradient tool, I'm going to click and drag in from the right side this time, just stopping, I think, just as I go over that warm sunset colour. I'm going to touch the V key once again, because what I'm thinking of here is just to balance the tones a little bit, just to warm it up a little bit on the right hand side. I'll touch the V key, maybe just needs to come in a little bit, maybe rotate, just so it spills over this area a little bit. Touching the V key again, I can reset this if I want to by double clicking and have another go. How far do I want to go? I think I'm reasonably happy with that. Now I think all that leaves is raising the tones in the bottom right corner and maybe lifting the bark of the trees, because the 3 trees in that prominent spot, they're quite an important part of the picture, and my manipulations have blocked them up a little bit. So I think to fix those, I'm going to turn to a brush. Let's go to our adjustment brush on the right hand side. Now you can see I've got quite a degree of feather here. If you look up at the options, you can see I've got the flow down quite low at 5. I've got my feather well up at 90. And the size, well, we can change the size of that with the square bracket keys to the right of the letter P. What do I want to do here? Well, I want to add some more exposure into those trees. Maybe I can lift the shadows too. So I'm going to brush over this area and you can see the sort of thing that I'm doing here. Now I'm going to enlarge the image and I'm going to take just a few seconds to just move up, probably up to about there on each of the trees. Now be careful you don't go over the edge, but if you do have an eraser up here so you can correct any mistakes. But I don't think you need to watch me do that. It's just careful brushing around the edge, making a nice small brush and just going up the center of the tree. Now as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've gone ahead and done that little bit of adjustment brush work on the bark of the trees just to raise the tones a little bit, and in the foreground bottom right corner. I think I'd like to do one more thing before we open this up into Photoshop as a smart object. I'm going to apply a bit of a vignette and I'm going to use the circular filter for that. So I'm going to select that on the right hand side and I'm going to double click right in the center of the screen, and there you can see the bounding box is perfectly placed. Of course I could adjust that if it's not going to suit my requirements, but I'm guessing it probably will. So I'm just going to touch my V key here and I'm going to go to my exposure, because all I want to do is to bring in that edge a little bit. Now if we look at the feather is quite high here. We can drop the feather down if we feel it's appropriate. Let me take that exposure off. And what I'm looking to do here is just darken those edges just to keep our attention on the center. Now maybe I've gone a bit too far there. Let's just back off a little bit. But when I'm happy with that, I think I'm going to go down to the bottom right corner and open this up as a smart object. If you want to work with smart objects, you can turn them on via the hyperlink at the center bottom of Adobe Camera Raw. Once I've got my image opened up into Photoshop, I always save it straight away, because in fact what I want to do next, I don't need the smart object status of the thumbnail here. I can double click the thumbnail and have this opened into Camera Raw, and I can make changes in a non-destructive way. But to do what I want to do next, I need to move on from this. So what I tend to do is to hit Ctrl J to make a copy. Then I rasterize one of those copies by going to the right of the thumbnail, right-clicking and choosing Rasterize Layer. So I've got the best of both worlds. As long as we save our layered file, we can always go back to our smart object if we need it. I don't keep these for very long, a couple of days until I'm sure I'm happy with my image, and then I would let them go. The first thing I'd like to do is a little bit of spotting and tidying up of one or two distractions. I'm going to create a new blank layer over the top of my layer. I'll do all my spotting on there. When I'm happy I've got them all okay, then I'll merge those two layers together. If I go to the toolbox on the left and select my spot healing brush, I just need to make sure that from the options at the top of the screen, I've got the little box ticked that says sample all layers. Now I've got a little dust mark in the sky there. If I just zoom in a little bit, we can see it. So I'll just touch that. But down here I've got one alongside those little bits of growth, and that just needed a quick touch. But over here I've got a few distractions. Let's zoom in just a little more here, because I'd like to do something with that bit of black right near the edge. I'll touch that a few times to make sure I'm happy with that. I don't like things that draw my attention right towards the edge of the frame, because that's distracting. Yes, it's minor, but it still does a little bit of distraction, and I see another little dust mark there. This is quite light in my eye line, so I'll just run my brush over that, and these little light spots, which are just catching the light, a bit of something on the ground there, looks like a piece of paper, but I'm sure it's not. You can see I do get a little bit fussy with these things, and they do make a difference. And from time to time, just to make sure you're not getting too carried away, just hit Ctrl-0, fit the image on screen, and just attack the problems that attract your attention. Looking down at the bottom right now, it all looks pretty good. So I think I've got all of the spotting done, and it all went reasonably easily, so it wouldn't be too much of a problem to save this in a layered file and just give it a different name. We could keep doing that. It's a personal choice, I think. But here, I'm quite happy to select both of those layers, right-click and just merge them together. Because I want to move on with something else. I've got a little bit of a halo along the tree line on the left-hand side. Now, I'm pretty certain it's probably something to do with the atmospherics that night, but I think I've probably made it worse by being a bit heavy-handed with the sliders, which I felt I needed to be. So I'm going to have a go at that with my burn tool. So let's select that from the toolbox. From the options at the top of the screen, I'll select highlights, and you can see my exposure is set to 10%. Let's see how that goes. I'll zoom in on the left-hand side. And as I zoom in, it doesn't look quite so bad, does it? So let's just wipe my brush along that top line there. There I can see it a little stronger, so we'll try to pay a bit more attention there. That's all I'm going to do. Now I'll zoom out and back in and do it again if I feel it needs it. And sometimes as we start to tone the tones down, we may need to switch to the mid-tones at the top left of the screen. But I'm going to do about another minute or so just along the edge there. I'll make the image very large just to make sure that I'm happy with the result. Now once I've reached that stage, I'm going to do a little bit of work with the colours. Not much, but just a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the same set of tools, but this time I'll select the sponge tool and saturate from the top of the screen, and I think I'll have a flow. I think I'll leave it at 5% and see how that goes, because I want to just target a little bit of colour in the sky here and in the water. So I'm going to adjust the brush a little bit, but just now brush in a little bit of colour down the bottom left. I don't want to go too much over the colour that's already strong. I just want to bring up some of the others. Maybe a little bit in the sky, especially the top left. working quite carefully here, and maybe even a little bit on the right hand side, but not a great deal. And I'm reasonably happy with that. Now, I don't know if you've noticed in the sky a little bit of paleness there. We can deal with that quite effectively too. Create a new blank layer above the image you're working on. Zoom in. And what we need to do is to sample a colour that's really close by here. So if I go to my eyedropper tool and I'll select this colour, you'll see it pop up as the foreground in our colour picker. Then if I pick up a brush, just a standard soft edge brush, you can see the settings I've got here, 20% opacity, 5% flow. And what I'm going to do is just brush over that area. There's no risk because I'm working on a new blank layer. If I'm happy with the result, then I can merge those two layers again. And I've noticed with Photoshop 2020 that the relationship between the opacity and the flow seems to have changed, because the settings I've been using for quite some years now are a little bit too heavy for me. So I used to use opacity at 100% and the flow down to 1%. But now I find that's not working. Something's changed in the engine room, and these two settings should give me a result. But of course, if it's a little bit too heavy, I can dump that new blank layer and start again. So all I need to do is to just brush over here and just brush in a little bit of colour. And you can see it's very minimal, and that's all I need to do. Pretty quick and simple, and when we see it done, we wonder, did we actually need that layer? But it's always good to have it. Let's hit Control 0. Let me just touch that little bit in the center of that little cloud. But other than that, I'm reasonably happy here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge all these together. I'll save them, flatten all of the layers, and then we'll take a last look. And lastly, with landscapes and seascapes, quite often I give them a little bit extra on the width, but without adjusting the height. The way I do that is to go to my image menu and my image size. And with an image like this, I click the little chain link which links the width and height together. And then I'd add something like 400 or 500 pixels. I think here, because we've already taken a little bit of a crop from the bottom, I'll keep it low and I'll make it 7400. And when I click OK, we'll get a little bit of extra width, but no height. And I think I'm more or less complete. When we shoot raw images, and when we're not shooting in the middle of a sunny day with the sun over our right shoulder, our editing skills need to be just a little bit better. Of course, we need technical skills with the camera to capture the best raw image we can, and we're also going to need some editing skills, especially if we're shooting raw. But we also need to know what makes a good image, and we need this skill both at the taking stage as well as the editing stage. If we're not sure where we're going with an image, then how could we possibly learn how to get there? I'll see you next time.